So today is May the 16th.
Only 14, 15 days from Easter.
Easter.
No, only 14, 15 days from the Easter.
Oh, till the youth trip. Yes, you're correct. Come on now.
No, not the youth trip, the school.
Right. Yeah. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right. So today's lesson in the study guide, if you want to follow along, it's session 11. The title of it is Sacrificed. And if you think about in the last lesson, we've talked about the Last Supper, which was the night before Jesus was crucified. We talked about denied, which was last week with Peter, who was one of God's most trusted disciples, who told God that he would die for him. He would follow him anywhere. And then once Christ was taken captive in the Garden of Gethsemane, that Peter denied him 3 times. And so today's lesson is, when you think about sacrifice, and if you look at the header, today's story is the crucifixion. Okay, we've already talked about the resurrection because Easter was several weeks ago. We've covered that, but so this is the culmination of the reason that Jesus came to the earth is what happens in today's lesson. Okay, so the verses for today, it's Luke 23, verses 33 through 46. I'm just going to read through them. We all kind of know this story, and this one, one of the great things about this story is it's got the story of the 2 thieves that are hanging beside Jesus in it as well, and how one of the thieves, how he responded to Jesus. So let's just read 33 through 46. It says, "And when they were come to the place which is called Calvary, there they crucified him and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. And the people stood beholding, and the rulers also with them derided him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself, if he be Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him vinegar, and saying, If thou be the King of the Jews, save thyself. And a superscription also was written over him in letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew, This is the King of the Jews. And one of the malefactors which were hanged railed on him, saying, If thou be Christ, save thyself and us. But the other answering rebuked him, saying, Dost thou not fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds, but this man hath done nothing amiss. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, today thou shalt be with me in paradise. And it was in the 6th hour, it was about the 6th hour, and there was a darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. And the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost. You ever heard the expression, gave up the ghost?
No.
You haven't? What do you think giving up the ghost means?
Spirit ascended.
Right. So if you give up the ghost, what happens to you? You die.
You lose your spirit. Oh.
Right. If you give up the ghost, that means you're dying, because your soul, your spirit, the ghost, the live, regardless of your body, the live part, when you give that up, it's no longer present in your body. So that's kind of where that expression, well, it's not an expression, it's in the Bible, but that's what it means. And so I'm sure you'll hear it at some point in your life if you hadn't before now. Okay, so back to the beginning of the lesson. So we're to the point now to where they had the trial of Jesus. They took him to Caiaphas, which was the high priest's house, after they captured him in the Garden of Gethsemane, and they questioned him there, which my understanding is, according to Jewish law, that was not legal to take him in secret in the night to do that. And then in the next morning is when they had the actual trial, because one of the interesting things I saw in the study guide is that according to 2 things. In Jewish law, they could not condemn Jesus to death. It was the Romans that had to condemn him to death. So that's why the leaders of the religion wanted to get him in front of Pontius Pilate, who was I think governor may be the right term, because he was the one who could actually give him a death sentence. Okay. Now, leading up to this, they tried all that they could do, took him to Pontius Pilate, pled their case, basically saying that he's blasphemed our religion. And Pilate said, to paraphrase, he said, okay, that's your problem. That's not a Roman problem. He's not done anything to offend Rome. They said, well, he's proclaiming himself the king of the Jews. And Pilate talked to him and said, are you the king? And the way what he ended up understanding was that Jesus was not this conquering king who was going to overthrow Rome. So he went back to him and he said, no. When they told him that he'd come from Galilee, Pilate took him to Herod, who was sort of an appointed king of the Jews. And Herod asked him some questions and basically asked him to show him a miracle, like a magic trick, and Jesus would not. So Herod sent him back to Pilate. So anyway, that's what led to him. So that happened on the morning of his crucifixion. So they take him to Calvary, which in the CSB, they say when they arrived at the place called the Skull, and it talks about how the translation of Calvary was skull. It's also called Golgotha, so it depends on which language they use, but you'll hear Golgotha, Calvary, or the skull. And they crucified him, and in the CSB it says they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on the right, one on the left. That's what a malefactor is. Mal is bad, so a malefactor is a bad actor, someone who's done a bad thing. And then obviously if you're crucified, a death penalty, they probably did something, I don't know. It calls them, in some places it calls them thieves. So I would hope that, for a thief, it wouldn't be a death penalty, but who knows? In Roman times, what they used capital punishment for. In any case, so he's crucified between the two thieves, the two criminals. We've heard this story many times, one on the right and one on the left. And but Jesus, before he died, hey there, if you'll mark yourself up and spit up there, thank you. He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, which was pretty gracious. And that sort of leads to, that's one thing that hopefully we can kind of take on ourselves, is that when someone does wrong by us, if Jesus could forgive them, those people who crucified him, hopefully through his grace and through his mercy, we should be able to forgive people who have done wrong by us, because God is going to be the ultimate judge, right? We've talked about that. But Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Now, they certainly knew they were crucifying him, right? But I think what he's saying here is that what they didn't know, or they wouldn't acknowledge, is that he truly was the Messiah. So on the Jewish part, they really did kill the Messiah. They refused to acknowledge it because he didn't fit their image of what the Messiah was going to be. The Romans, they were the ones who ultimately tried him, found him guilty, and literally were the ones that nailed him to the cross. It wasn't the Jews that did that. So whether Jesus was saying forgive them for they know not what they do, Jesus is a forgiving person. I mean, that's what he was about, was bringing salvation and grace, one, so that we could have eternal life with him, but also to set an example, a model for us. But in any case, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment, which is his clothes, and cast lots. And cast lots, my understanding, it's sort of like almost like rolling dice or something. It's a way to determine who wins his robe, his clothes. Okay, and that was prophesied in the Old Testament. So this was fulfillment of prophecy. Verse 35, it says, and the people stood beholding, and the rulers also with him. So people were watching, because normally they would crucify people in a public place because they wanted it to be an example of the consequences of actions. So there are people watching. I'm sure there were people passing by. But it says the people stood beholding, and the rulers also with them. And again, this is kind of talking about the Jewish leaders. And the rulers also with them derided him. So deriding, what does that mean to you? To deride someone? Anybody? I think the translation in CSB is mock him. Well, it says the people stood watching, even the leaders were scoffing. So to deride someone means to talk mean about them. That's kind of a very basic translation. To deride someone, to chastise them, to talk mean about them, maybe or may not justify it. I mean, you can deride someone if they're doing something they shouldn't be. To deride them is perhaps for correction. But in this case, it says they were scoffing him in the CSB, the leaders, okay, or the rulers, it says. And so what did they say? He saved others. Let him save himself. So that was their scoffing and mocking. You looking at him, you up there, you say you're the king of the Jews, you say you're the Messiah. You've done all these miracles. They acknowledged he saved others. Now, what he really was doing in dying was he was providing the ability for salvation, for saving us from our sins. But he literally had saved others, right? He had raised people from the dead. He had healed many people's sicknesses, from everything from leprosy to blindness to being lame. So they said he saved others, let him save himself. And that was kind of like tempting him. If you're who you say you are, save yourself. If he be the Christ, the chosen of God. All right, then next, the soldiers in verse 36, and the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him vinegar. Now, vinegar in the CSB, it says the soldiers also mocked him. They came offering him sour wine. So if you think about the process for making wine, generally speaking, you take a fruit, grape, apple, whatever it is. We'll take grapes because that's probably a very prevalent example. But you take these grapes and they press them. And in that show, The Chosen, I was talking about, they shows in their wine press, Simon Peter's wife there's something to hold on to up above, and she's walking on these grapes, right? Just mashing the juice out of them in this big thing. And there's a drain, and it drains, and they collect the juice from whatever fruit it is, and they put it in a place and do something to it, maybe put yeast in it or something that causes it to ferment. Now, to ferment means to me to sour or to spoil, right? Not necessarily spoil. That's kind of what I think of ferment. But that's what causes the alcohol to be produced in the wine, all right? And it gets to a point to where I don't know how you characterize it or describe it, it tastes the best at some point. And then, depending on how it's done or if it's left open, then it continues to ferment and it goes bad, right? And it just turns into, as they describe it, maybe vinegar, or spoiled wine. So even then, when they're mocking him, asking him if he was thirsty and offering him something to drink, it wasn't really something like water or something that would be good. And maybe they were offering him something to, you think about what alcohol does when you drink it. There's a lot of things, reduces your inhibitions, but basically it numbs you, right? So if he was in pain and he drank this, perhaps maybe they were offering him something that would numb his pain. I don't know that they were really benevolent, nice people, these soldiers. But in any case, because when it says they mocked him, offering him vinegar or spoiled wine, I don't know that it was necessarily as a good thing. But they also said in verse 37, if thou be the king of the Jews, save thyself. So everybody's kind of using who he proclaimed to be against him. We want to see a miracle. Or if you're really who you say you are, save yourself. Okay. Now, here's something that anytime you see a depiction of the crucifixion, there is a sign posted above Christ on the cross. Here's what it says. And a superscription also was written over him in letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew. So this says 3 different languages. It's written, this is the King of the Jews. And if you remember, in one of the Gospels, it talks about when Pilate said, put a sign over him that says, here's Jesus, the King of the Jews. The religious leaders said, no. Can you make it a sign that says he claims to be the King of the Jews? And Pilate said, no. That's what it's going to say. So inadvertently, they really did, with this sign, proclaim who he was. And it's interesting, if a lot of the depictions I've seen, it's got a sign up there and it has 4 letters on it, I-N-R-E. Has anybody ever seen that? I look at it, I think, what does NRE mean? What is that saying? And I I've seen it explained that, and of course that's just one in one language, but the I stands for Jesus, uh, and I is trying to think of if it was to stand for if it was really an I or what the symbol was. But basically, it's Jesus, Emmanuel, Yeshua. Uh, the N is Nazareth, which is where he was from. The R is for Rex, which, if you think about, if you've seen translations, Rex refers to a king. And E is for, that stands for Jews. And I can't remember what the word is that translates to, but INRE translates to Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. So who knows how they did Greek and Latin and Hebrew, but obviously there was a sign above him that proclaimed who he was, even though most of those there denied that, mocked it. Okay. Now, one of the significant things in this story is the two thieves, the two criminals beside him. And it talks about in the study guide in one of the other gospels, both of them were kind of railing on him or deriding him or mocking him or chastising him. But one of them, in this story, it doesn't talk about that. But in this, at this point in the story, one of them kind of turns around. Okay, and that's where it picks up in Luke's gospel. It says, "And one of the malefactors which were hanged railed on Jesus, saying, If thou be Christ, save thyself and us." So we had the religious leaders, the soldiers, and now the two criminals on either side mocking him, or at least this one says, "If you're Christ, save yourself and us." Now, why would he say save us if you're really the Christ? Maybe it's because, well, if you got the power to do it, why not save us? I don't know. But the other answering, rebuked him. So one criminal is rebuking the other criminal now, saying, "Do you not fear God?" So obviously one of them knew who God was. "Dost thou not fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation?" So we're all being hung on a cross for things we've done, or you and I have. We're all in the same circumstance. The three of us are all being hung. But he says in verse 41, "And we indeed justly." So we are hanging here for a valid reason. Okay. In CSB, it says, "Don't you even fear God, since you are undergoing the same punishment?" We are punished justly because we're getting back what we deserve for the things we did. But this man has done nothing wrong. So he acknowledged that Jesus was innocent. He has done nothing amiss, as it says in King James. So what did he do by doing that? He's acknowledged God, right? He's acknowledging Jesus is of God. He's admitting that he is guilty. The other guys, he says, we're guilty. Why are you rebuking Jesus? So he knows God. He's acknowledging Jesus is of God. He's admitting that he is a sinner, right? And he's asking Jesus in verse 42, and he said unto Jesus, "Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom." So he's asking Jesus to remember him, okay, to save him. That's his eternal soul. So that was an example of steps to salvation. Okay? And how did Jesus respond? Anyone who prays to Jesus and says, "Lord, I'm a sinner. I know I'm a sinner. Please forgive me for my sins. I turn from my sin." There's the repent part. "And I ask you to come into my heart, come into my life, to live in my life. I give myself to you. Please change me and help me to live the life that's pleasing to you, to be what you want me to be." How does Jesus respond to that when you pray that prayer? He says, "Yes, of course, okay." And that's when you change, right? Now, Jesus doesn't literally answer you when you say that prayer and say, "Yes, Ed, you're forgiven, you're mine, and I will have you in heaven," because I didn't hear that, but I know it because of what the Bible tells me. In this case, this guy who went through those steps of salvation got a literal verbal answer from Jesus. Okay? And Jesus said unto him, "Verily I say unto thee, today thou shalt be with me in paradise." Now, what a relief that would have been for that thief. And then we'll finish up quickly here. It says it was about the 6th hour. In the Bible, the way the day started there, it was at 6 a.m. Okay. So around 9 in the morning, I think it was the third hour when they had the trial. The sixth hour was noon when he's on the cross. And from the sixth hour to the ninth hour, so from noon till 3 p.m., there was darkness over all the earth. So this wasn't a solar eclipse. It was 3 hours of a phenomenon where God darkened over all the earth so people would know something is going on. Is kind of how I see that. Okay. And the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost. He said 2 or 3 things in different gospels. But what's significant about this, he said, forgive them, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. He said, it is finished. And when he died, when he gave up the ghost, when his soul left his body to return back to heaven, the veil in the temple was torn. We've heard that story too from Pastor Richard many times. In the temple, you had a little room that was the Holy of Holies where the Ark of the Covenant was, that only the chief priest could go in one time per year, one time. And that veil separated that room from the rest of the temple where other people were allowed to be. When Jesus died, that veil, that curtain, which Pastor Richard has described as potentially very thick, from top to bottom, it tore. So, and there was an earthquake as well. But God, obviously, his hand did that. And it represented a couple things. In the study guide, it talks about Jesus' body being broken and torn, represented by that. The other thing that I think of when it's torn is in the past, only the high priest could go in once a year to talk to God to seek forgiveness for the sins of the people. When that veil was torn, now there is no more need for a priest to talk to God on my behalf, right? I can speak directly to God and talk to God through prayer. I can ask God to forgive me for my sins. I can praise God. I can have a conversation with God. I don't need a priest. And that's the significance of it to me, is by Jesus dying, they took away that need for an intermediary between man and God. Now we can approach him directly. Okay. But before I close, there's one statement in the study guide that really struck me when the criminal who asked Jesus to remember him. It says, this criminal demonstrated what true belief is with an acknowledgement of guilt and a cry for salvation. So as it said, that was the step to salvation that he took. Jesus immediately answered him. And if you remember, Jesus died. Because the Sabbath was coming, they wanted to end this, so they broke the legs of the other 2 thieves, because you're on a cross, and what kills you is suffocating. As you sag and sag, it's hard to breathe. And so in order to breathe, you have to kind of push back up to catch a breath, which is very painful. And at some point, you just lose your strength and you suffocate. So they broke their legs so they could not push up to breathe. So it accelerates the dying process. Okay, that was how crucifixion worked. Okay. Any case, questions or comments on that? Of course, we remember the rest of the story. On the morning of the third day, this was on Friday. On the morning of the third day, Jesus rose, which is prophesied, and that's the cornerstone of Christianity. Okay, very good. Let me end this. Thank you all. Hello, Miss Ella.